Hello, and welcome to Budget Commander. On this channel, we'll discuss Magic the Gathering topics with a focus on playing Commander on a budget. We'll cover things like deck building, top cards, deck techs, and more. Let's get started. Hello friends, today we have a Volrath the Shapestealer deck tech for you. This is a budget deck tech, specifically 2DH, meaning all the cards in the deck are $2 or under, with the exception to the Commander, which can be $5 or under. All the cards were price checked using mtgstocks.com on the day of recording. The total cost of this deck on the day of recording was $64. Keep in mind, prices do fluctuate, so they might be a little bit more when you see them, or they might have gone under the prices that I have listed in this video. Volrath the Shapestealer is a 5-to-cast 7/5 shapeshifter, so really good stats there. This is an Infect deck, so the goal of the deck is to kill our opponents off with Infect damage. For those of you that don't know, Infect is essentially a different kind of damage where you only need to deal 10 of that type of damage to an opponent. Creatures with the Infect ability deal damage with -1/-1 counters to other creatures, and then they give opponents poison counters. If an opponent has 10 poison counters, they lose the game. So we're going to try to get Infect on our opponents. We also want to give our opponents' creatures -1/-1 counters, and we want to make our Infect creatures more threatening with +1/+1 counters. We've got a lot of different counters going on, so we're also going to be proliferating in this deck. If you're not familiar with the proliferate mechanic, then that is something where you get to choose any counters that are on the table, and you can give an additional of that counter. So you can give more -1/-1 counters to your opponent's creatures, more Infect counters to your opponent's life total, and then more +1/+1 counters to your own creatures. So, as with all our decks, we're going to start out by talking about Accelerants, how we're going to ramp up and get into our game plan. I already told you guys what the game plan was. We also need to be able to interfere with our opponent's game plan, so mess up whatever they're trying to do and accomplish. We'll then talk about cards that provide consistency, help us to continue and press our game plan. And then lastly, we'll talk about the lands that are going to help us cast the spells in our deck, and some utility lands that help us accomplish our game plan as well. Into Accelerants, we have Talisman of Curiosity and Talisman of Resilience. Both are mana rocks that can tap to add colorless, or they can help us fix our colors at the cost of 1 damage to us. We also have Secura Tribe Elder, which we can sack to essentially cheat an extra land into play early. Farseek, Rampant Growth, and Skyshroud Claim are also going to help us get lands to the battlefield early. Farseek can only get us a swamp or a island. Skyshroud Claim gets us 2 forests that come in untapped, and then Rampant Growth can get us any land to the battlefield tapped. We don't have a ton of Accelerants, and that's because our game plan is pretty low to the ground. Our converted mana cost of a lot of our creatures is pretty low, or a lot of our spells is pretty low. As you can see here with the Glistener Elf and the Blighted Agent, both are 1/1s with Infect for 1 and 2 respectively in their converted mana costs. The Blighted Agent does have Unblockable, so that makes it a little bit harder for your opponents to deal with. Then we have Phyresis, which is a 2-to-cast aura, which gives a creature Infect. So we want to try and put this on one of our bigger, more threatening creatures and make it a little bit scary for our opponents. Further off, we want to further press our Infect strategy with Blight Mamba, 1/1 with Infect and Regenerate. The Icarats, which gives all the players an Infect counter or a poison counter when it enters, and then it's a 2/1 with Infect. And then the Reaper of Shieldred, which is a 5-to-cast 2/5 with Infect. And if a source deals damage to the Reaper of Shieldred, that source's controller gets a poison counter. Then we have Phyrexian Swarmlord. This is an all-star in the deck. It's a 4/4 with Infect, but at the beginning of our upkeep, we get to put a 1/1 insect creature token with Infect onto the battlefield for each poison counter our opponents have. So if we're at a 4-player pod and each of our opponents has 3 counters, we get to put 9 1/1s with Infect out. This only makes it easier for you to get more Infect on your opponents, essentially giving you more tokens the following turn. So really hard for your opponents to deal with. Board wipe is probably the best way. We also have Tainted Strike, which can give a creature Infect, also pumps them +1. aqueous form, which makes our Infect creatures unblockable. It also helps smooth out our draws because it gives us a scry on attack. Into more evasion, we have Distortion Strike, which gives a creature unblockable as well as +1/+0, and it has rebound, so it comes back for us the following turn. And then Trailblazer's Boots, which gives essentially unblockable. It says equipped creature has non-basic land walk. Almost all of our opponents are going to be running some form of non-basic lands in their deck, so this essentially gives a creature unblockable. Then we have Invisible Stalker, a 1/1 which is unblockable, and we'd also like to give that creature Infect if able. Whisper Silk Cloak gives out unblockable as well as Shroud, so it makes that creature you can't target it, and your opponents can't target it, so you got to be a little bit careful with that, but great all-around equipment. Elusive Crassus is a unblockable creature, which is just going to slowly get bigger as larger creatures enter the battlefield because it has Evolve. And then Herald of Secret Streams is a card that gives all of our creatures with +1/+1 unblockable. We have a lot of ways to put +1/+1 counters out on our creatures. We'll get into that in a second. But then we also can proliferate those creatures to make them bigger across the board, our whole team. So it makes our whole team hard to deal with. Hadana's Climb is one of the ways that we like to put +1/+1 counters out. If we have 3 or more +1/+1 counters on a creature, we get to transform it into the Winged Temple of Orazca, which further gives evasion and doubles the power of our creatures. We can pay 3 and tap the Temple of Orazca to give a creature flying, as well as double its power. So great card there. If we don't want to use it for the evasion, we can also use it to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. Rancor gives a creature +2/+0 and trample, and also keeps coming back, so continues to make our Infect creatures threatening. Mutagenic Growth is a great card here, kind of a surprise card because it has that Phyrexian mana, which means we can pay 2 life instead of cast it for a green. But we also can cast it for a green, but it can surprise a lot of opponents because we'll look like we're tapped out, and then we can pump a creature to either trade or pump a creature to finish them off with Infect damage, or just finish them off altogether. So good card there. Simic Ascendancy is a kind of secret win condition. We can pay 3 to put +1/+1 counters on our creatures, but when we get +1/+1 counters, and not just from Simic Ascendancy, but from any other source, Proliferate, we get to put growth counters on the Simic Ascendancy, and if it gets 20 or more growth counters at the beginning of our upkeep, we're going to win the game. Generous Patron also helps us get +1/+1 counters on our creatures. If we need to, in a pinch, we can put the +1/+1 counters on our opponent's creatures to draw cards, but usually we want to put those counters on our own Infect creatures. Invigorate is another great card in any Infect deck because you can play it for free, essentially, to give a creature +4/+4 as long as we're willing to give our opponent 3 life. We don't mind giving our opponent 3 life because we're trying to kill them with poison counters, not regular damage. Forgotten Ancient, also a great card here. Every time somebody plays a spell, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Then at the beginning of your upkeep, move those +1 counters to your creatures with Infect, making them threatening. Your opponents have to deal with the things with Infect, but they also need to remove the Forgotten Ancient so he stops getting counters. Evolution Sage gives us Landfall Proliferate. Play a land, proliferate is great. Rolesk Apex Hybrid is a 4/5 flyer with trample who gets to put +1/+1 counters on our things, and then when it dies, it proliferates twice. Quasi Duplicate as well as Spark Double come in as copies of creatures we control. The Quasi Duplicate has Jumpstart, so we can cast it again from our graveyard, and Spark Double gives a +1/+1 counter to whatever we copy, and it ignores the legendary rule, so we could even copy Volrath with this. Having 2 Volraths on the battlefield seems pretty good to me. Last clone effect, we have Altered Ego, which comes in with X +1/+1 counters, but it doesn't have to copy our own things. We can even copy our opponent's creatures if we need to. Unholy Indenture gives a creature Undying. Giant Ataphage is a secondary win condition. It's great if we can give it Infect, but if not, he can win the game, or it can win the game on its own. And then we have the Nest of Scarabs, just a great utility card here. Whenever a creature gets -1/-1 counter on it, we get to put a black 1/1 insect creature token out, so it can help us overwhelm our opponents, or give us chump blockers, or sacrifice bait. We're gonna further interfere with our opponent's plans by having Hapatra out. She puts -1/-1 counters on our opponent's creatures on combat damage, and then whenever those creatures get -1/-1, we get to create snakes with Death Touch. So continue to press our advantage and also be more threatening. Grim Affliction is going to put -1/-1 counter on something, so we can either nerf a really big thing or just kill off a little thing, but then we get to proliferate. So just continue the pressure. Wall of Stolen Identity is similar to, it's like an Oblivion Ring in blue, and you get a copy of that creature. So as long as you control this wall that's a clone, they don't get to untap their creature. Evil Twin comes in as a copy of anything, and then if it has haste, or if you make it to your next turn, you can pay 2 and tap it and destroy the creature that you copied. Torment of Venom gives -1/-1 ×3 to a creature, and then Corrupted Conscience allows you to gain control of an opponent's creature, give that creature Infect. So steal something huge and then swing for the fences. Hex is going to help us to clear the path for our creatures if we don't have unblockable for them. We can destroy 6 creatures with it. You do have to wait till the board's a little bit fuller, but then you can get, it's a 6 creatures for 6 mana. It's a great trade. Ingaruk's Wake is a similar card that helps open up the fields for us so that we can get in by destroying all of our opponent's creatures as well as their planeswalkers. And then Volrath, of course, is going to be removing things with his -1/-1 counters. Viridian Corruptor is an Infect creature that's a 2/2, and also when it enters you get to destroy an artifact, and then Corrupted Resolve and Counterspell are going to help us counter our opponent's plans. Sultai Charm, solid removal. Get rid of a monocolored creature or destroy an artifact or enchantment. In a pinch you can draw 2 cards and discard a card with it. Vraska the Unseen, great card here. -3 ability, destroy any non-land permanent. If you get to ultimate her, she's going to give you some assassins that can just kill off players, and you have quite a few ways to make those creatures unblockable, so it wouldn't be too hard to get them in. And then Casualties of War, you're going to pay 6 and you can choose 1 or more, but you're going to be able to hit an artifact, destroy an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, a land, as well as a planeswalker. So a lot of threats you can remove with this one card. We're going to provide this deck consistency with cards like Contentious Plan and Tezzeret's Gambit that draws cards. They also proliferate for us. Then there's a card like Thought Sponge. It's got flash, so we're going to want to cast it on our opponent's turn after they've cast a draw spell. Maybe an opponent plays Harmonize, they draw 3 cards in addition to the 1 card that they drew at the start of their turn. Then you flash in the Thought Sponge. It enters with 4 +1/+1 counters, 1 for each card that player drew. And then when the Thought Sponge dies, you get to draw cards equal to its power. So in that scenario, you get to draw 5 cards off of it dying. But you also have all these proliferate triggers, so there's potential that you could just make this a lot bigger. Corpse Cur is going to give us a little bit more redundancy in that we can return those Infect creatures back to our hand. It also has Infect itself. Palace Siege, we're going to want to choose Con so that we can get those Infect creatures back. And then Bolas' Citadel, which allows us to play the top card of our library as long as we're willing to pay X life, where X is the mana cost of that card. It also allows us to sacrifice 10 non-land permanents for each opponent to lose 10 life. So there might be some strange corner cases where that comes into play, but mostly we're playing that to be able to play the top card of our library. Viral Drake is a superstar in this deck because you can proliferate multiple times in a turn with it. It also is a 1/4 flyer with Infect. Solid card. You want this out. This is the thing you're probably going to want to be recurring from your graveyard if you're able to. You don't even need to be able to deal combat damage as long as each of your opponent has at least 1 poison counter. You can just win the game by spending mana into this guy. Villainous Wealth is a fun card. Dump all your mana into it and just see what cards you get off the top of your opponent's library. Hopefully you get some good hits. The lands that are going to help us get there, we're running 6 forests, 5 swamps, and 5 islands in this deck. We have Command Tower and Opulent Palace, which give us all our colors. Exotic Orchard can give us maybe all of our colors, but usually we're going to get at least 1 or 2 of our colors from it. Evolving Wilds, Myriad Landscape, Terramorphic Expanse help us fetch the colors that we need. Then we have Golgari Guildgate, Golgari Rot Farm, Llanowar Wastes, which give us green and black. Tainted Wood, Temple of Malady, and Woodland Cemetery, which also give us green and black. Simic Growth Chamber, Simic Guildgate, Yavimaya Coast, which give us green and blue. Dimir Aqueduct, Dimir Guildgate, which give us blue and black. And then Halmar Depths, which can give us blue. But more importantly, we get to look at the top 3 cards of our library when we play it and rearrange them however we see fit. So it helps smooth out our draws and continue our game plan. Llanowar Reborn, Norwegian Heart of Progress, and Oran Reef the Vastwood give our creatures +1/+1 counters. Norwegian Heart of Progress gives a +1/+1 counter to each creature that entered the battlefield this turn. Oran Reef the Vastwood can give each creature that's green a +1/+1 counter. And then Llanowar Reborn can give a one-time +1/+1 counter to a creature that entered the battlefield. We like being able to put +1/+1 counters on our creatures through lots of different ways, especially lands, because they're harder to remove. This makes those Infect creatures, instead of it entering as a 2/2 with Infect, oh, now it's a 3/3 with Infect. This really sucks. Then we have Grasping Dunes, which helps us get those -1/-1 counters where we need, giving more activations or targets for Volrath. Rogue's Passage, which gives those creatures unblockable, or to whatever creature we need to give unblockable. Temple of the False God helps us ramp out. And then Karn's Bastion, another all-star, because it has that keyword proliferate. We want to proliferate our way to the win if we can't get in with combat damage. Pretty nice mana curve there. You can see I've arranged it for you. If a card had X in its mana cost, I just put it down as a 7, so the number is rough, but the average CMC was 3.41. If you like the idea of infecting your opponents out of the game, give this deck a go. Let me know how it went. Otherwise, if your group is not about Infect and they don't like having Infect as part of their play group, which I've seen a couple groups do, let me know what deck you want to see next time, and we'll see if we can't make that happen for you. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you next time. Peace. Thanks for watching. You can help support this channel by hitting that subscribe button. This will help keep you up to date on content from Budget Commander. If you liked the video, make sure you like the video. Leave me a comment with your thoughts on this topic. And if you think someone else could benefit from this video, feel free to share. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk with you next time.